Well, the United States has called on Russia to immediately de-escalate violence in Aleppo in Syria, as we've heard. Both President Obama and President Putin are attending a summit in Peru. It's Mr. Obama's final stop on his last world tour as US Commander-in-Chief. The two leaders have often endured a troubled relationship, but could that be about to change when Donald Trump takes over? Joining me now is Professor of Politics and Director of the Jordan Center for the Advanced Study of Russia at New York University, Joshua Tucker. Good evening to you. First of all, let's characterize, or if you could for us, the relationship between Russia and America as it stands now.
The current state of Russian-American relations is one of a lot of tension, I think is the best way to sort of appraise this. There has been a lot of pushback between Russia and the United States. There are a lot of flashpoints of contention, most notably the Russian annexation of Crimea, and as well as the Western response to that involving sanctions, and then large differences of opinion about the best way to proceed in terms of the Syrian conflict.
And in your estimation, could President-elect Trump change the status of this relationship? How do his views perhaps lean to a more conciliatory relationship with Russia?
Right. So the key word in your question there, Gillian, is whether President-elect Trump could change the relationship. Absolutely, he could change the relationship. Whether he will is the most important question here. And I think at this point, the most important thing we can communicate to watchers, to people who are interested in the U.S.-Russian relations, is just how much fundamental uncertainty there is at this point in time. There are two things to be aware of. First of all, President-elect Trump made very conciliatory remarks, very positive remarks towards President Putin as part of his campaign. But it's important to know that this is one of the, perhaps the most extreme place in which he dovetailed from sort of traditional Republican positions on the U.S. relations, in general, but in this area of U.S. relations towards Russia. So this is going to be one big question. The second thing is trying to figure out whether his positive comments about President Putin were related more towards President Putin's style of leadership and style of projecting Russia's power in the world, or as opposed to sort of belief in the sort of legitimacy of President Putin's interests in Europe, in the Middle East. And these are two different questions.
And as you say, I mean, he might have identified elements of President Putin's character that appeal to him. But for the mainstay of Republicans, they will be against any sort of conciliatory move or certainly any appearance that America is kowtowing to Russia.
Oh, absolutely. I think that's totally correct. And I also think, there's going to be strong, as you said, there's going to be tension between traditional Republican positions towards Russia and what President Trump wants to do in terms of Russian relations if he is looking at sort of a fundamental reversal of the positions that the U.S. government has held previously. That being said, it's important to realize that of all the question marks we have about how American policy is going to change following the new administration coming to power, foreign policy is probably the area where the president has the most ability to unilaterally influence changes in policy, which makes in particular interesting the question of who he is going to choose for Secretary of State and Secretary of Defense. You mentioned in the lead-in that Mitt Romney is potentially being considered for Secretary of State. Mitt Romney had a very different take on Russia during his presidential campaign just 4 years ago, so that would immediately kind of bring this issue to the forefront.
Let's talk about NATO and President-elect Trump. He's questioned the existence of NATO and perhaps America's role or how large a role they should have, and certainly that member states should contribute more financially. That, we would imagine, would be music to Putin's ears.
Again, it depends. Really what you think the implication of that statement is. If the implication of that statement is that Trump wants our NATO allies to contribute a larger portion of their budget towards military spending, that's actually, if that happens, is not going to necessarily be music to President Putin's ears, right? If those comments signify less of a fundamental commitment to the NATO alliance, then I think that is music to President Putin's ears. So it's a very big question. Is this Trump approaching it as a deal maker who looks at this situation and says, hey, the United States is getting taken advantage of in this deal, and we need our partners to contribute more to military spending? Or is Trump looking at this as saying, this is not where my interests lie. My interests lie elsewhere. My foreign policy interests are much more focused on ISIS. I'm less concerned about traditional U.S. concerns in Europe. And it's part of a sort of larger overall push towards a kind of more isolationist foreign policy for the United States. But again, I want to come back to what I started with. Trump said a lot of things during the campaign, and we just really do not have much of an idea of what's going to happen next. And he has an awful wide latitude as president in terms of the policies that he wants to pursue.
Thank you very much for sharing your expertise with us. Joshua Tucker, Professor of Politics and Director of the Jordan Center for the Advanced Study of Russia. Long title. Thank you very much. Good to speak to you.
Thanks for having me.